Right now, somewhere near you, there are other people, on a bus, in an office, scrolling next to you on a couch. You barely notice them. They look like you. They think like you. They are, in every sense that matters, the same kind of animal as you. But for most of the time humans have existed on this planet, that was not true. For most of human history, if you looked around, you would have seen someone who was not quite like you at all. Someone shorter, heavier-browed, stronger in the arms, with a skull built for a different kind of mind. And the real answer to why you don't see that anymore is far stranger than extinction. You have been taught a simple story. Modern humans appeared. Other human species disappeared. One species won. But that is not what the fossil record shows. It is not what the DNA shows either. What actually happened is messier, older, and much closer to you than you think. Because you are not just descended from one kind of human. You are, quite literally, made of several. Let's go back 300,000 years. Not one human species walking the earth. At least 6. In Africa, Homo Sapiens, your direct ancestors, were beginning to emerge, with brains and skulls close to your own. In Europe and Western Asia, Neanderthals had already been thriving for over 100,000 years, built thick and powerful for the cold, with brains that were, on average, slightly larger than yours. In Siberia, a mysterious group now called the Denisovans left almost no bones behind, just a finger bone and a few teeth, yet their DNA tells us they were widespread and successful. In Indonesia, a tiny species nicknamed the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis, stood barely over 3 feet tall and hunted pygmy elephants on an isolated island. In the Philippines, Homo luzonensis left behind bones so strange that researchers are still debating what they even mean. And in South Africa, Homo naledi was surviving in deep, dark cave systems, with a brain a third the size of yours, yet possibly burying its dead. 6 species, overlapping in time, sharing a planet. Why does that feel impossible to imagine? Because you have never lived in a world like that. No human alive today has. For the first time in millions of years, there is only one kind of human left, and that fact is so unusual that your brain treats it as normal. Here is where it gets stranger. These species were not sealed off from each other, silently existing on separate continents like background characters in different stories. They met. They competed for the same caves, the same rivers, the same herds of animals. And in at least 3 known cases, they had children together. In 2010, a team led by geneticist Svante Pääbo sequenced the first Neanderthal genome and made a discovery that reshaped human history. If your ancestors came from outside Africa, somewhere between 1% and 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. Not metaphorically, literally. Genes that affect your skin, your hair, your immune system, even how you respond to certain diseases today, came from a species you were taught went extinct. A few years later, geneticist David Reich and his colleagues found something even stranger hiding in the genomes of people from Papua New Guinea and parts of island Southeast Asia. Up to 6% of their DNA traces back to the Denisovans, a species so poorly known from fossils that scientists have never even agreed on what they looked like. So, which is it? Did other human species go extinct, or did they just get absorbed? The honest answer, according to paleoanthropologists like Chris Stringer of the Natural History Museum in London, is both. Some populations were pushed out, outcompeted for resources as Homo sapiens expanded with more complex tools, wider social networks, and possibly language itself. Some vanished during brutal climate swings that other species simply couldn't adapt to fast enough. But others didn't disappear so much as dissolve. Small, scattered Neanderthal and Denisovan groups met small, scattered groups of Homo sapiens, interbred, and over dozens of generations, their distinct identity blurred into the wider human population. They didn't lose the evolutionary race. They merged with the species that would go on to tell the story. Think about what that means. The other human species isn't a rival that lost. It's a relative that got absorbed. Somewhere in your body, right now, there may be a gene inherited from a Neanderthal mother or a Denisovan father, passed down across roughly 2,000 generations, still quietly doing its job. Why did Homo sapiens end up being the ones left standing if biology alone wasn't the deciding factor? Researchers like Richard Klein have pointed to something that shows up in the archaeological record around 50 to 70,000 years ago. A sudden explosion of symbolic behavior. Beads, pigments, elaborate burials, long-distance trade networks connecting groups hundreds of miles apart. Not just tool use, but culture that could be taught, shared, and improved across generations far faster than evolution alone could work. Neanderthals were not the brutish cavemen of old cartoons. They made tools, cared for their injured, likely used symbolic ochre, and some evidence even suggests they created cave art in Spain tens of thousands of years before modern humans arrived there. But what Homo sapiens seemed to have was scale. Bigger, more connected social networks. And when climate shocks hit, and they hit hard and often during that period, a species with wider trade routes and more flexible culture had more ways to survive a bad decade than an isolated group of a few hundred individuals clinging to one valley. So it wasn't that one species was smarter and the other was dumber. It was that one species built bigger webs of cooperation, and those webs turned out to be the real survival tool. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. For roughly 6 million years, since the human lineage split from other apes, there was never a moment with only one human species on Earth. Not once. Multiple human species overlapping, competing, occasionally interbreeding, has been the default state of this planet for nearly the entire history of our genus. The lonely, single-species world you live in, where human only means one thing, is not the rule. It is the exception. It has only been true for the last 40,000 years, a sliver of time so small it barely registers on the timeline of our existence. You are living through the single strangest stretch of human history there has ever been. A planet with only one kind of human on it has never happened before, as far as we can tell, and it may not have been supposed to happen this way at all. It's less a triumph and more an accident of climate, timing, and connection. So the next time you're in a crowded room and everyone around you looks basically like you, remember what that actually represents. It isn't the natural order finally settling into place. It's the last chapter of a much longer story, where 5 or 6 sibling species used to share the same fires, the same rivers, the same fear of the dark. Some of them lost that fight to time and climate. Others simply became part of you. Right now, somewhere near you, there are other people. And in a very real, very literal sense, some of what makes them who they are came from someone who wasn't quite human the way you define it today. You are not the end of a story where every other human species simply failed. You are the continuation of several stories that quietly folded into one.